It started with a party I didn't even want to throw. We were supposed to be celebrating our son's scholarship, a full ride, mechanical engineering, the kind of thing fathers brag about for the rest of their lives. I'd bought steaks. I cleaned the patio. I even borrowed those ridiculous string lights from our neighbor just to make the place feel festive. I was doing what a man does, building something out of nothing, pulling pride out of dust. She invited him. Said he was a family friend, someone she'd met through her new yoga studio. His name was Chase. Not Charles. Not Chris. Chase. A name that already sounds like it belongs on the sleeve of a gym bag or etched into the side of a personal trainer's water bottle. I remember looking at him, white teeth, fake tan, hair like he spends more time in the mirror than most women, and thinking there's no way this clown's here for the potluck. He brought gluten-free cupcakes. My wife, let's just call her what she is, she laughed too hard at every joke he made, touched his arm when she didn't need to, even cut his steak for him because he just had shoulder surgery. I stood there holding a pair of tongs, looking like the hired help in my own backyard, while she giggled like a high school girl who just discovered lip gloss. The part that gutted me, though? My kids liked him. They laughed with him. Asked him about his car, his job, if he ever skydived. And he had stories. The kind that sound just real enough to pass, just dramatic enough to be unforgettable. And every time he told one, she looked at him like he was solving equations in the sky. After the party, the house was a mess. I stayed behind to clean while she went inside with a bottle of wine and Chase's number saved in her phone like it was a recipe she didn't want to forget. I picked up his cupcake wrapper, he'd left it on our deck railing, and stared at the grease spot like it was evidence from a crime scene. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to her, hearing the soft pings of her phone vibrating under the pillow. She'd turn it face down, then curl toward the wall. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I wasn't ready to see how deep the route went. But something cracked open the next morning. I took her car to get the oil changed. She was running late for a client meeting, asked me to handle it. When I plugged her phone into the charger in the center console, it lit up. Chase, I can still taste you. It hit me like getting shoved underwater. I stared at the screen, not blinking. It didn't feel real. Not just because of the message, but because of what it meant. The timing. The party had ended 6 hours ago. That meant while I was scrubbing barbecue sauce off the patio furniture, she was somewhere with him, being tasted. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I just drove. Past the mechanic, past our bank, past everything. I ended up parked behind an abandoned gas station on the edge of town, holding her phone, scrolling through weeks, maybe months, of messages, photos, some tame, some that made my stomach turn. But what tore me in half were the ones where she talked about me, called me boring, predictable, just a dad, as if fatherhood was a sentence and not a choice I made with my whole damn soul. By the time I drove back, she was already on the porch waiting. "Where the hell were you?" she asked, like she'd noticed my absence for the first time in a decade. I handed her the phone, didn't say a word. She looked at the screen, blinked once, then twice, and then, as if I'd caught her stealing cookies and not tearing our life apart, she shrugged. "He's younger. You don't make me feel wanted anymore. No apology. No shame, just that." As if my loyalty, my sacrifices, the years I spent building our life brick by brick, they were all just some old receipt she could crumple and toss. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Something inside me was breaking, and she didn't even flinch. That's when I realized I hadn't lost her that night. I'd lost her long ago. But the kids? The kids were going to be the part one didn't see coming. I didn't leave right away. That's the part people never understand. They think once you catch someone red-handed, the next move is instant. Pack a bag. Slam a door. Peel off into the night. But life doesn't work like that when you've got 2 kids and 20 years of memories wrapped around your throat like a noose. She went inside like it was any other Tuesday. I sat on the porch for what felt like hours. The sun was going down and I just kept replaying her words. "You don't make me feel wanted anymore." It was the kind of sentence you can't forget even if you try because it seeps into everything. Every dinner, every conversation, every moment you thought was real. Suddenly you question if she ever meant any of it. If she was always looking for an exit. If you were just a warm placeholder for someone more exciting. The worst part? I hadn't even told the kids. That night I didn't eat. I laid on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan while she moved around upstairs like nothing had happened. I could hear her humming, like she'd just finished a satisfying workout or closed a big deal at work. The next morning, I woke up to find her making pancakes. She was in a robe, still wet from the shower. She smiled at me. "You want coffee?" Coffee. As if everything hadn't crumbled into dust 16 hours ago. I stared at her, wondering if she was actually this detached, or if she was playing some twisted game where she got to pretend I was the crazy one. That's what people like her do. They twist the narrative. They turn betrayal into a miscommunication. They try to make you doubt your own memory. I didn't answer. I grabbed my keys and went to work, but my hands were shaking so bad I had to sit in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I could walk in. All day I thought about how I was going to tell the kids. That night I asked them to sit down in the living room. Madison was there too. She sat in the corner with a blanket over her legs, sipping tea, acting like we were about to watch a movie together. I didn't sugarcoat it. I found messages. "Between your mom and a man named Chase." Chloe looked confused. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Madison didn't blink. I kept going. "They've been seeing each other behind my back. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It's been going on for a while." Silence. Then Madison chimed in calm, rehearsed. "Your father's exaggerating. We've had some problems, sure, but it's not what he's making it sound like. Chase is a friend. That's it." I looked at her, then at them. "Do you want to see the messages?" That's when the shift happened. Dylan stood up. "No," he said, voice clipped. "I believe Mom." It was like the air was pulled from the room. Chloe looked from me to her brother, then to Madison, who just smiled like she was watching a plan unfold exactly how she'd rehearsed it. "You believe her?" "She wouldn't lie," Dylan said, folding his arms. "And you've been weird lately. Maybe you're the one losing it." That's when I felt it. The second betrayal. It wasn't just my wife. It was my son. The one I'd taken to every soccer practice. The one I taught to drive. The one I'd cried for when he broke his arm and I couldn't take the pain away. He turned on me like it was nothing. And Madison just watched. She didn't stop him. She didn't defend me. She sat there with a look that said, "You're not going to win this one." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stood up and walked out. Not out of the house, out of the room. Because at that moment I realized I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing everything. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came a few days later when I realized she had already started poisoning the well long before I found the messages. She had been preparing them for this moment. Whisper by whisper. Lie by lie. And now? They were hers. Completely, the house changed after that night. Not in a way you could see. The furniture was still in place, the walls still held our family photos, but the air felt altered. Charged. Like a place where something had died but no one had buried it yet. I'd walk into the kitchen and Dylan would stop talking mid-sentence. Chloe started spending more time at her friend's house, texting constantly when she was home, never looking me in the eye for longer than 2 seconds. They were slipping from me and I couldn't stop it. And Madison? She thrived in the silence. She'd move around the house like she owned every inch of it, head high, back straight, like some damn queen surveying her kingdom after victory. It was like I'd been demoted to some live-in failure and she was just waiting for me to do what men like me usually do in stories like this: give up, disappear, become a footnote. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. One evening I came home to find Chase in my house. Not in the driveway. Not on the porch. Inside. He was sitting at the dining table, his jacket slung over the back of my chair, laughing with Dylan like they were old friends catching up. Madison was at the sink rinsing wine glasses. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. "You didn't tell me we had company," I said, my voice low. She turned, towel in hand, and offered me the fakest smile I've ever seen. "He stopped by to help Dylan with some internship stuff. Thought you'd be home later." My son barely looked up. "Chase knows a guy at Lockheed. He's got connections. You want me to get ahead, right?" Chase finally turned to me, smiling like he was trying to disarm a bomb with charm. "Hey, man. Hope it's cool I came by." I didn't answer. I just stood there, trying to keep the rage buried beneath my ribs. He was in my house. In my chair. In my son's ear. And Madison had let him in, no, invited him in, like he belonged. I sat across from him, just staring. The tension was a thick, ugly thing crawling between us. "Funny," I finally said, "I don't remember inviting you." Chase laughed. Guess I'm just making myself at home. He said it with that glint in his eye. Like he knew I couldn't touch him. Not with Dylan sitting there, watching, already sold on whatever version of reality Madison had handed him. That night I told Madison it was over. I said I wanted her out. Her and her little gym hero. I didn't care where they went, but they weren't going to keep playing house under my roof. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She laughed. You think the kids are going with you? She asked, folding her arms. They've seen what you are. You're stuck in some sad routine, waiting for the world to give you a gold star for being a husband. But I moved on. They moved on. I'm their father. And Chase is the one they trust. That was when I understood. This wasn't an affair. It wasn't even about love. It was a takeover. She had rewritten the entire story, who I was, what I meant, the life we built, and replaced it with a shiny lie that looked more exciting, more modern, more useful to her new image. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was the obstacle. She left 3 days later. Took her things. Packed Chloe's clothes. Dylan stayed in his room with his headphones on like nothing was happening. She didn't say goodbye. Not to me. Not really. She left a note on the kitchen counter that read like a customer service email, cold, efficient, no humanity. And just like that, the house was empty. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was screaming. And I knew it wasn't over. Because when someone like her wins too easily, they always come back for more. The quiet that settled into the house after they left wasn't the kind that lets you sleep better. It was the kind that fills your ears so completely you start to hear things that aren't there, echoes of doors that aren't opening anymore, laughter that used to bounce off the walls and now just lives in your memory. I walked around that house like a ghost, not because I missed her, but because everything she took had been mine, too. The routines broke down. I stopped eating dinner at the table. Laundry piled up. My phone barely buzzed except for the occasional automated text from my bank. I kept telling myself I needed to snap out of it. File the papers. Start over. Be the man people say you're supposed to be after you've been gutted from the inside out. Then she showed up again. A week after she left on a Tuesday that had no business being dramatic, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked through the blinds and saw her SUV. She stepped out like she was still living there, wearing that expensive jacket I bought her last Christmas and holding 2 iced coffees, one for her, one for him. She didn't knock. I opened the door before she reached for the handle. Forgot how to use the doorbell? I asked. She didn't smile. I need to grab a few more things. And Chase is helping me move the last of the boxes from the garage. He walked up behind her, cocky as ever, like this was just another errand on his to-do list. No shame. Not even a flicker of discomfort. Just that stupid, artificial charm dripping off him. Afternoon, he said, stepping past me like he owned the place. I followed them to the garage. She started pointing out things like I wasn't even there. Those bins are Chloe's. The silver toolbox, Chase, can you grab that? That's my toolbox, I said, stepping forward. She turned, finally acknowledging me. Oh, come on. You never even used it. That's not the point. You're seriously fighting over tools now? I stepped between them, not touching either, but close enough that Chase flinched. You come into my house and you don't get to decide what stays and what goes. You want stuff? Send a lawyer. He looked at her like he was waiting for permission to say something. She didn't stop him. Maybe you should chill out, Chase said. You're acting a little unstable. I looked him dead in the eyes. You think you know me? He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. You've been here 5 minutes. I was here for 20 years. I cleaned vomit off those floors when our kids were sick. I held her hand when her father died. I built that swing set with my bare hands even though my back was already shot. So don't you dare talk to me about unstable. You're just the latest excuse. Madison stepped between us then. Not protectively, strategically. This is exactly why the kids didn't want to stay with you, she said. There it was. The knife. I didn't even tell them I was coming today, she continued. They don't care. They're moving on. Like I am. You mean they believe everything you told them? She tilted her head. They believe what they see. And what they've seen is a man falling apart. You painted me that way. You needed me to fall apart so your story would make sense. She didn't deny it. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. It wasn't enough for her to leave. She needed me small, forgettable, replaced. They left a few minutes later with 3 bins and that silver toolbox. She didn't say goodbye. He smirked the whole way down the driveway. And as they drove off, I didn't feel defeated. I felt something shift. Because now I knew this wasn't just about infidelity. It was war. And I was finally awake. It's strange what you start to notice when you've got nothing left to distract you. The patterns, the timing, the lies that once slipped past you because you trusted too much and questioned too little. After they left, I didn't spend my nights grieving. I spent them piecing things together, rewinding every conversation, every missing hour, every last-minute business dinner she claimed to have. Madison wasn't just cheating. She'd been building a new life behind my back for longer than I wanted to admit. And she was using me as the stepping stone. But she made one mistake. She thought I'd go quietly. 2 weeks passed. No contact from the kids. Not a single call. Not even a text to ask if I was still alive. Dylan had blocked my number. Chloe left me on read. Madison had gotten to them. Twisted everything. Made herself the victim, and me the villain in a story they didn't even bother to verify. So I did what I should have done sooner. I called our family accountant. He owed me a favor. Years ago, I'd covered his landscaping bills after his son wrecked our fence with a dirt bike. I didn't press charges. Never brought it up again. But when I asked him to check a few things, he didn't hesitate. That's when the real cracks opened. Madison had drained 2 joint accounts in the last 3 months. Not slowly. Not quietly. Just enough to stay under the radar, but not enough to be accidental. She was preparing for this. Setting up her escape route. She'd even funneled some of the money into a new business account, one I wasn't on. The business name? Karai's Wellness. Yoga. Smoothies. Mindfulness. The kind of shiny, Instagram-ready startup people pretend is about healing but is really just about power. And guess whose name was also on the paperwork? Chase. That's when the nausea hit. Because now it all made sense. This wasn't some whirlwind affair. This was a hostile takeover. She didn't just fall out of love. She built a replacement version of our entire life, with a younger man, stolen money, and my kids as trophies. I wanted to confront her. God. I wanted to storm that little studio and drag the truth out of her in front of everyone she was lying to. But I knew better. She was too good at playing the calm, enlightened one. She'd spin it. Make me look like the crazy, bitter ex-husband who couldn't move on. So I waited. I called a lawyer. A quiet one. Someone discreet, but sharp. And I handed him everything. Bank statements. Text records. Proof of misappropriated funds. Photos. Timelines. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. I needed a position of strength. Then something unexpected happened. Chloe showed up at the house. It was almost 10 p.m. I was in the garage, boxing up some old tools, when I heard the knock. I opened the door and there she was. Hoodie, no makeup, eyes red. She looked like a kid again, like the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. She didn't say anything for a second, just stood there. Then, I need to know the truth. I didn't ask why. I just let her in. We sat in the kitchen where the silence used to scream. I pulled up everything on my laptop, the messages, the financial records, the screenshots. I laid it all out. And for the first time, she didn't defend her mother. She didn't cry either. She just stared. She said you were being paranoid, Chloe whispered. That you couldn't handle the divorce. That you were trying to sabotage her. I wasn't the one hiding money, I said. Or manipulating the people I love. She nodded slowly. Processing. Then she looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in weeks. Guilt? She's planning to move. To another state. With Chase. She told Dylan last night. That hit me like a punch to the throat. She's taking you both? Chloe hesitated. She was. But now? I don't know. The door cracked. Just a sliver. But it was something. I didn't ask her to choose. I didn't beg. I just told her, you always have a place here. No matter what. She stayed for 3 hours. Didn't say much after that. Just sat with me. The silence felt different this time. Warmer. Familiar. And when she left, she hugged me. First time since this all began. And that's when I knew the empire Madison built? It wasn't as bulletproof as she thought. 3 days passed after Chloe's visit and I didn't hear from her again. No calls. No texts. Nothing. I didn't push it. I figured she needed time to process everything I'd shown her. That kind of truth, the kind that flips your whole world upside down, it doesn't land softly. It knocks the wind out of you. But I also knew something had shifted. That crack in Madison's perfect little facade? It wasn't going to stay small for long. Not after Chloe had seen what was behind it. Then came the email. A formal, carefully worded message from a lawyer representing her. The subject line might as well have been a bullet, custody and asset reallocation proposal. She wanted to split the house. Sell it. Divide proceeds. Said she was pursuing a more fulfilling chapter in her life and believed this transition could be mutually empowering. Mutually empowering. That was the moment I stopped wondering if she still had a conscience. She didn't want the house for the kids. She wanted the win. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without responding. He called me an hour later. We can bury this, he said. The financial misconduct alone gives you leverage. And if we subpoena her communications, this becomes a very different negotiation. Do it, I said. Every inch. What I didn't expect, what I couldn't have prepared for, was what happened that Saturday. I was out on the porch replacing a warped plank in the railing when Dylan pulled up. Not Chase. Dylan. He got out of the car slowly, hands in his hoodie, looking unsure for the first time in what felt like months. His eyes weren't hard like they'd been. There was no trace of that arrogant wall he'd put up the last time we spoke. I heard Mom's leaving, he said. No hello. I nodded. With Chase. She wants to move. He looked at the house. At the lawn he used to mow. The garage where we built his first science project together. The driveway where I taught him how to ride a bike. I could see the memories hitting him, one after another, like waves against glass. She didn't tell me it was out of state, he said quietly. Just that we'd all be better off. She says that a lot, I replied. Better off. Happier. Fulfilled. It's her way of justifying destruction. He stood there for a long time. Then he asked something I wasn't ready for. Why didn't you fight harder for her? It hit me like a knife between the ribs. Because I thought I was building something real, I said. And when someone you love stops believing in it, you don't fight to keep them. You fight to keep yourself. And I nearly lost that too. He didn't respond. But he didn't walk away either. He stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about the divorce. We didn't talk about Chase. We talked about football. About classes. About the dog he wanted to get when he finally moved out on his own. It was like we were rewinding to a time before everything got poisoned. Then, just before he left, he said something that cracked me open. Chloe told me what you showed her. I didn't want to believe it, but it adds up. She's your mom, I said. I get it. Yeah, but you're my dad. And I should have come to you first. He drove off. I stood in the doorway watching the taillights disappear down the road. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt something real. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Hope. But it didn't last. Because the next morning I woke up to a voicemail. From Madison. Calm voice. Flat tone. I know what you're doing. You think you're smart, poisoning the kids against me, playing victim while you dig through my accounts. You want war? You've got it. But don't say I didn't give you a chance to walk away. No fear in her voice. Just cold precision. She wasn't just angry now. She was cornered. And that's when people like her become dangerous. I didn't respond to her voicemail. There was nothing left to say, no olive branch, no middle ground. Madison didn't call to negotiate. She called to threaten. Because she could feel it now. Control slipping through her fingers like sand, no matter how tightly she clenched. And when people like her feel power slipping, they don't ask questions, they go for the throat. By Monday, the retaliation began. Started small. The login to our shared cloud account suddenly failed. The one we'd used for years to back up photos, documents, everything. Then I got locked out of the utility accounts. The thermostat app. Even the grocery delivery app. She changed the password to that too. For reasons I still don't understand. It was petty. But it was deliberate. Then came the real blow. I got a call from my job's HR department. An anonymous complaint, they said. Inappropriate workplace behavior. Unprofessional language. Emotional instability. The words didn't even sound real. I've worked at that firm for 12 years. Clean record. Trusted. Steady. But here I was in a sterile meeting room with a folder in front of me containing a typed list of concerns, all vague enough to be impossible to disprove but sharp enough to rattle. I knew exactly who sent it. And I knew why. Madison wasn't trying to protect her image anymore. She was trying to erase mine. But here's the thing she never understood. I document everything. The texts. The accounts. The transfers. Even the voicemail she left. All backed up. All cataloged. So I handed my lawyer a flash drive and told him to prepare for scorched earth. Still, nothing prepared me for what came next. On Wednesday night, I opened the front door to grab a package and found Chase standing on my porch. Alone. Hands in his pockets. Smiling like we were neighbors who'd both forgotten to bring the trash cans in. "You got a minute?" he asked. I didn't answer. Just leaned on the doorframe, waiting. "She's unraveling," he said, dropping the smile. "Thought you should know." I studied him, confused. Was this an act? A trick? Some ridiculous performance to make me second-guess everything? "She told me you'd try to ruin her," he continued. "Said you were a manipulative, depressed control freak. But I've seen what she's been doing lately. How she talks when she thinks no one's listening. I didn't sign up for this." He looked tired. Like whatever fantasy she'd sold him was starting to rot from the inside. "You're telling me you're done with her?" "No," he said. "I'm telling you I'm not sure I ever knew her." I didn't know whether to laugh, punch him, or invite him in. Instead, I said, "Why are you really here?" He hesitated. "Then, she's planning something with the kids. A legal play. Something about parental alienation. Trying to flip the script. She's convinced if she can prove you poisoned them against her, she can take full custody even now. Maybe even spousal support." I stared at him, every muscle in my jaw locked. "She tell you that before or after she transferred 20 grand into your shared account?" I asked. His eyes widened for just a second. That was all I needed to see. "You should go," I said. "Before I forget who you are." He didn't argue. Just nodded and walked off the porch, his shoulders a little heavier than when he'd arrived. I closed the door and sat down at the kitchen table. Not out of fear, but to plan. Because now it was clear, Madison wasn't just trying to destroy me. She was willing to drag everyone down with her. The kids. Chase. Anyone who dared to see her for what she really was. But what she didn't realize was that her moves, her cold, calculated chaos had finally pushed our children to a place she could never recover them from. Because sometimes, when you burn every bridge, you forget who helped build them in the first place. And I was done watching her torch the life I made. There's a moment, just before the final breach, when everything goes still. It's not peace. It's pressure. A quiet, thick with tension. Like the whole world is holding its breath. That's where I was. Standing on the edge, waiting for Madison's next move, but no longer afraid of it. The storm finally hit on a Thursday. I got served. A court summons, hand-delivered to my job by a courier in a blazer who barely made eye contact. It was all there, neatly typed and stapled. Petitioner seeks full legal custody of both children. Evidence of mental and emotional instability. Alleged attempts to alienate minor child from custodial parent. She hadn't just gone through with it. She'd gone nuclear. And she was lying. Blatantly. Shamelessly. She claimed I screamed at the kids. That I made threats. That I was paranoid, controlling, emotionally erratic. She even listed episodes of dangerous behavior, referencing arguments that never happened in moods that didn't exist. She turned our living room into a courtroom before I ever had a chance to defend myself. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I called Chloe. She answered on the second ring. "I got the papers," I said. "I know," she whispered. "She made me sign something." "What did you sign?" She told me it was just for school records. Some emergency contact thing. I didn't read it. That was when I felt the room spin. Madison was using our own daughter as a pawn. Weaponizing her trust. Her confusion. My heart broke and hardened at the same time. "You need to be careful," I said. Don't sign anything else without showing me first. Please. I'm sorry, she said, voice shaking. I didn't know. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. An hour later, Dylan called too. I want to fix this, he said. I'm not okay with what she's doing. She's not going to stop, I told him. This isn't about custody. This is about control. She's trying to bury me. But we're going to fight back, legally, carefully. And I need you to stay calm. Can you do that? I'm with you, he said. I hung up, sat back, and stared at the stack of papers on my table. This was her endgame. Not just taking the kids. Not just the money. But erasing me from the picture entirely. And I finally understood what kind of war this was. It wasn't about love lost. It was about rewriting history. She wanted to be the wronged woman, the reborn survivor. She wanted her little yoga empire to shine untarnished by the truth. And to do that, she needed me silent, legally gagged, reputationally ruined, locked out of my own story. But the thing is, Madison underestimated one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. My kids were coming back. Not as bystanders, but as witnesses. My lawyer filed the countersuit the next morning. Full documentation of every lie, every stolen dollar, every manipulation. We submitted the recordings, the messages, even testimony from Chase, who, surprisingly, agreed to sign a sworn statement detailing Madison's plans and erratic behavior. I didn't trust him, but I didn't need to. I just needed his words on paper. Then, in a poetic twist of fate, the court ordered a temporary hearing to determine immediate custody arrangements pending investigation. That's when I saw her again. Madison. In court. She walked in like a politician at a campaign stop, calm, practiced, smug. She wore white. Of course she did. She always dressed the part when playing the victim. Her lawyer whispered in her ear like they were planning a victory toast. But when the judge asked if the children were present and willing to speak, and both Dylan and Chloe stood up from the back of the room and walked forward, her face cracked. Just for a second. A flicker of panic. A loss of control. And that 1 second? It was worth every sleepless night. There are courtroom silences that weigh more than words. The kind that press down on you, make your heart slow and your breath catch. That's what it felt like when Dylan and Chloe stood up that day. No one said a thing. Not even Madison. Not even her lawyer. Because everyone in that room knew something had just shifted. The judge, a tired-looking woman with a voice like sandpaper and a face that had seen too many ugly divorces, leaned forward slightly, eyeing the two of them. You're both here voluntarily? Yes, Your Honor, Dylan said, clear and steady. We want to be heard. I'm listening. Chloe spoke first. Soft, but certain. She told the judge about the manipulation. About how Madison had twisted the truth, how she'd pressured her into signing documents she didn't understand. How she'd used guilt like a leash. She told me Dad was dangerous. That he'd fall apart. That he couldn't handle being alone, Chloe said, voice shaking but firm. But he didn't fall apart. She lied. And she keeps lying. Then Dylan stepped up. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He said something I'll never forget. She tried to erase him. And I helped her. Because I believed her. And I was wrong. The judge asked a few questions. Measured. Direct. Then she looked at Madison. And Madison, for the first time, had no performance ready. She didn't cry. She didn't make a speech. She just stared ahead. Frozen. As if she couldn't quite compute how the scene had flipped on her. Her lawyer scrambled to pivot, arguing about emotional confusion, stress-induced lapses, temporary estrangement. But it was too late. The judge wasn't moved. She ruled in my favor for temporary custody evaluations, not just physical access, but full review of the parental situation, which meant interviews, therapists, background checks, even financial reviews. Madison's carefully arranged version of reality was about to be dissected. After court, I walked out into the sunlight, not victorious. Not yet, but solid for the first time in months. Chloe came out first. She looked at me, hesitated, then ran into my arms. No hesitation anymore. No awkwardness. Dylan followed. He didn't hug me. He just stood beside me. I've got your back now, he said. No matter what she says next. And that was it. The final blow hadn't landed yet. But the tide had turned. I knew Madison wasn't done. She wasn't the type to fold just because the courtroom didn't bend to her will. She'd find another angle, another lie, another face to wear. But what she didn't have anymore was her greatest weapon. My kids. She'd lost them, and no amount of white clothing or smooth-talking lawyers could change that. What came next wasn't pretty. There were more meetings, more threats, more passive-aggressive messages through mutual friends. She tried to shame me online, a vague post about narcissists and emotional abuse survivors reclaiming power. I didn't respond. Neither did the kids. Then came the final twist. A message from Chase. Not a call. Not a knock. Just a text. I'm out. She's not who I thought. You were right. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then deleted it. Didn't matter. He was just another one of her pawns. Another man who thought he was special until she turned her venom on him, too. Let him deal with the fallout. Let them all. Because I wasn't putting the pieces back together for her anymore. I was building something new. It didn't end with fireworks. There was no dramatic confession, no courtroom meltdown, no last-minute twist where she came crawling back with apologies and crocodile tears. Madison didn't beg. She broke. Quietly. Piece by piece. The final hearing came 6 weeks later. Everything was on the table by then, the finances, the manipulation, the lies. My lawyer presented the timeline with surgical precision. Madison's contradictions fell apart under cross-examination. Even her own business partner from Corai's Wellness testified that she'd become erratic, impossible to work with, and obsessed with controlling the narrative more than managing the studio. By the time Chase submitted his own affidavit, calmly stating that she'd encouraged him to lie, fabricate claims against me, and even suggested planting something to use in court, the courtroom was silent again. That heavy silence. The kind that knows the game's over. The judge's ruling wasn't dramatic. Just firm. Shared custody reinstated. No spousal support granted. Financial penalties for the misused funds. Supervised visitation until Madison completed a court-approved counseling program. And a mandatory cease and desist on any further online defamation or indirect public attacks. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled. After court, I walked out alone. Not because the kids weren't with me, they were. Chloe linked her arm in mine. Dylan walked close. But emotionally, I was alone. Because something inside me had changed for good. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't just hurt. It reshapes you. Turns you from the inside out. Not into something bitter. No, that's the lie people like Madison want you to believe. It makes you sharp. Clear. Real. Madison didn't come over again. Not even once. No more fake drop-ins. No more smug little visits with iced coffees and stolen glances. She moved to a smaller place across town, rebranded her studio under a new name, and tried to pivot the story into something inspirational. A woman rebuilding after narcissistic trauma. I didn't respond. Neither did the kids. We let her talk. She always liked to hear herself talk. But something else happened that I didn't expect. One night, months later, I was sitting in the backyard. Same patio, same grill, same string lights I once borrowed from the neighbor. And Dylan came out. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there. Then, "Do you ever miss her?" Took me a moment. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought she was. But that person never existed." He nodded. Sat down next to me. "You think she ever loved us?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was sharp, and I knew it would cut. "She loved what we gave her," I said finally. "The image, the admiration, the attention. But when we stopped feeding it, she didn't know who we were anymore." Chloe joined us later. We didn't talk about Madison that night. We just ate grilled chicken, laughed about dumb movies, and watched the sky turn to ink above us. It wasn't the life I had before, but it was better, stronger, real. And in the years that followed, when people asked what happened, when they heard the story or caught whispers of the chaos, I always told them the truth. My wife betrayed me. The kids stood by her lover. They cut me off. Then, years later, they came back, begging for forgiveness. And I gave it to them, not because I'm noble, but because they saw through the lie before it was too late. And that saved all of us.